Great. Welcome to the next session, which is led by the START Network. And we're going to be discussing the unique and interconnected role of climate development and humanitarian actors in the crisis continuum. I'm joined by a number of my peers here. So we have Rajiv Jha from Humanitarian Aid International. Rajiv works as the global climate lead. Rajiv works as the Director of Programs, focusing in disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, primarily focusing in India. We then have Matthias Soderberg, the Global Climate Lead for Dan Church Aid, focusing on climate both within the NGO sector and Dan Church Aid, but also you play an important role with the ACT Alliance, looking at climate and the intersection with development. And then we have Hari Krishna from Help Age International. You work in climate change, and you also have a particular focus on aging and how climate change impacts aging populations. So as START Network, we were really keen to try to pull together sort of humanitarian development and climate-focused practitioners, and to have a really good discussion about the interconnectedness between our areas of work and how we collaborate, how we connect, how we coordinate with one another, because too often we find ourselves operating in silos. And while it obviously causes us some difficulty working like that, the people that really are impacted by this lack of connectivity are the people that we're aiming to serve. So those communities who are particularly vulnerable to climate change in the context of this discussion. So keen to get started and perhaps hear a little bit more about who we have on the panel, the area that you work in, and your sort of initial reflections. Perhaps I can come to you first, Hari. Would you like to just introduce yourself and just provide a bit more of an overview of where you work and how you operate?
Sure. Thank you, Lucy. I am Hari Krishna. You can call me Hari, and I work with Help Age International as advisor on climate change and aging. And our central focus is of Help Age International. Central focus is ensuring that older people's safety, dignity, protection, and well-being are taken care. And all these are threatened because of the climate change. And therefore, we also have interventions that make sure that older people are protected in the scenario of climate change extremes. And coming to this particular nexus, that it is very, very important that humanitarian development climate actors, they work together because they have a lot to contribute to each other. For instance, climate actors can bring climate science in terms of early warning. They can bring adaptation strategies, which are vital for development actors to ensure that systematically reduce poverty and vulnerability, and at the same time create a situation where humanitarian imperatives are reduced. And therefore, the humanitarian actors can find it a lot more easier to provide faster humanitarian response and ensure that far less people are suffering due to climate extremes. So these are my initial thoughts, and we'll come back later.
Thank you, Hari. Matthias, perhaps we could hear a little bit more from you, like who are you, where do you work, sort of what is your area of operation?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, and thank you also for inviting me here. Dan Church Aid, we are a traditional development and humanitarian NGO, and we've been working in this nexus with development, humanitarian, and peace for many years. But climate change is threatening the development we try to create, and it's also certainly clearly linked to the humanitarian work we were doing. So therefore, for us, it's been very important to find ways to integrate the climate debate with the development and humanitarian debates, and especially on program level, but also in our advocacy work and our engagement in public debates. Yeah.
Thank you, Matthias. And Rajiv, perhaps we can hear from you also.
Thank you. I'm Rajiv Jha, and I work for a not-for-profit called the Humanitarian Aid International. It's a newly established organization based out in South, established by Sudhanshu Sekhar Singh. You might be knowing him. And we work closely on the humanitarian response, DRR and CCA, and climate advocacy. So before this thought came of Nexus, we were already having the Nexus in our organization, and the people are working together. And why I'm saying so, because if you see the SDG goals, first 3-4 goals are health, education, gender, water, and the last is partnership for the to achieve the goals. In entire 17, humanitarian response is missing. SDG goals maybe not be the missing, but not in the bold way it has to be, the way it has to be given. Maybe somewhere in between the lines, one dotted lines were there. So I think the humanitarian response has to be equally on platform along with DRR and CCA, because the climate change is the one who is, all the issues are converging. So it's transportation, it's energy, it's air pollution, it's a livelihood, it's a gender, it's agriculture. And the more the climate change impact will have, more the humanitarian response will have, because the immediate response is a humanitarian response. And thereafter you have the mitigation and recovery will happen. So the partnership with all these three factors has to be mobilized to be in synergy, in my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Interestingly, just last year we interviewed Professor Salim Al-Hook before his passing. We were doing a Start Network some research into the impacts of climate change on small to medium scale crises. And he was speaking of the crises that we see nowadays, how all of them can be attributed in part to climate change. So there's really sort of attribution that can be made for all of the humanitarian crises that we're seeing. And I think that's sort of to your point, you know, humanitarian development, peace, climate actors, we're sort of all working in the same space. Where do you see complementarity between and among these different actors in our space? Perhaps Harry?
Sure. I think this complementarity is always there, but we probably have not seen it. And as Rajiv just said, that if you go to the grassroots level, lot of community organizations, they never work in silos. They always have a nexus approach, because the communities do not have a single problem. They have multiple problems. But we always, for some reason, maybe largely due to the aid framework that we have, we always have approached the issues in a compartmental way. And we probably, after decades of experience, now we are talking about the importance of having this kind of nexus. Now, definitely this kind of complementarity is that, as I said before, climate change actors, they are very good at anticipating, forecasting, and providing strategies for adaptation. And at the same time, development actors are very good at systematically promoting development and building resilience. And the humanitarian actors are very good at providing faster humanitarian response. And if you see in the disaster cycle, and these three are very, very important: anticipation and response and recovery. And all these three actors, when they come together, they plan together, they strategize together, we can have a comprehensive resilience strategy for communities, where the disasters and climate extremes are anticipated, and they are integrated into development planning, and the humanitarian response is much faster and quicker. Thank you.
Any reflections or anything that either of you would like to add? Matthias?
Yeah, well, I would, I absolutely agree fully in the need for the collaboration, and that we can get a lot of gains by working together. But I also, when I look on the sectors today, I also see some challenges, and I think it's really important that we are aware of the risk of working in silos. The humanitarian sector, I mean, we have so many years of experiences. We have developed instruments and approaches and principles and so many things which are good with the humanitarian work. but if we do not take new knowledge and experience in from the climate community, the humanitarian sector will not be able to respond to the climate crisis. So at the same time, the climate community tend to, at least there's a risk I see, to reinvent the wheel, to try to develop approaches and solutions which appear as new, while we have so much experiences in the humanitarian work which should just be copied. As an example, in the climate bubble, we talk about loss and damage and the need for compensation to people. In the humanitarian work, we have been working with cash for I don't know how long time, and we're working with group cash, for example, which I see at least as a way of compensating. But it's just different ways of talking about it. But when we look at how to do it on the ground, we need to sort of align.
And good example with the cash, and I think that's been under discussion at this COP, the potential for cash in the context of climate change and the modalities in which we provide loss and damage funding and other resources. Rajiv, can I come to you? Any further thoughts with regard to the complementarity?
I'll give you a couple of examples. One example is from our project, what we do. We are working in a delta called Sundarban Delta in India. That is one of the climate hotspot area, very near to the state of Bengal and the Bay of Bengal. Every year they face 2 or 3 severe cyclones. And the community is, in a way, good enough in anticipatory actions. They know that's when cyclone will come and how to respond, when to respond. They are now tuned in for last 25, 30 years since the community they are suffering from. But we went for the area for having a climate change project. The fundamental question was that, what is that? Because this is a deprived community, vulnerable community, and they're looking for an incentive for the development. They're looking for the roads, the power, the good water, education, health. And the climate change agenda is not in their mind. And they're right. Right, because they are not the one who contributed for the climate change. The people in cities have contributed a lot more than the people somewhere we are going to work with. So the question was very right. How are you going to negotiate with that? And you have to work with them. So you have to unpack the entire theory and knowledge of the climate change, going with the livelihood generation approach, gender empowerment, and then climate change, and then humanitarian response, because they also look forward for immediate relief. Because climate change is a long-term impact. 30 years of average data you need for the climate change impact, then you can show that. And you can say that your flower is blooming in April, but maybe this next year is blooming in the month of September or August, because the impact of the climate change is happening. So that kind of language you don't understand. So unless you not crystallify it, not unpack it, and there is a role of the mitigation, the recovery, humanitarian response together to have the very crystal clear message to them to have the maximum impact. Second thing is, the nature of problem is changing. See the humanitarian crisis, Rohingya, Syria. It's a longer crisis, and the solution doesn't lie with you. Its political solution lies. So any humanitarian actor is going into the areas of working with the community, he has to take the issue of development practices. So how long you can continue to provide them food without talking about the education and the health and the waste management and the road? So it has to have a triple responsibility has to go together, because climate change is coming on the top. To mitigate that, you have development and then the humanitarian response. But every road has to go through the same way. Maybe actors are different. Actors are different because we have invested in a way differently. So think differently for sectoral gains and expertise and to say our know-how. But overall, it's the interrelated issues, and we'll have to see into that perspective. So in a way, it's a way to work in coming days. Yeah.
You've touched on so many significant points. I can see Matthias wanting to perhaps react. I was going to just pick up the point that you've made around crises being increasingly protracted. and you drew upon some examples, Syria being sort of just one of those examples. But crises are becoming increasingly protracted, and it's placing a greater burden on the diminishing funding that we have, and sort of contributing also to this widening funding gap between growing humanitarian need and sort of plateauing humanitarian financing. And maybe just to reflect a little bit more widely on funds and financing, it's the COP29 is called the financing COP for good reason, talking a lot about the financing that's necessary, partly for the loss and damage fund under the UNFCCC, but talking about financing for climate change more widely. What role does financing play when it comes to the interconnectedness of development, humanitarian, climate? Or what role can funders be playing, perhaps?
Sure. I think that's. I think the whole thing starts from there. So they have definitely a role to play in bridging this nexus between these three actors, and this loss and damage finance and adaptation finance, and so they all. This finance should be comprehensive, and it should cover multiple aspects of vulnerability and risks of communities. And also there should be a flexible mechanism in terms of how the organizations will use this funding from in the entire crisis continuum, and not only just for adaptation, not only for mitigation, also for building resilience. And at the same time, there should be a flexible mechanism for organizations to reserve some fund for humanitarian response. And also it's vice versa. When there is humanitarian actors are very good in fundraising, and they are very agile in their response action. And humanitarian funding also should have a flexibility in terms of giving some space for investment for long-term preparedness and resilience building. And humanitarian actors have a lot to contribute in terms of their tools, their strategies and methodologies of working with communities, and also making a swift action to provide quick response and quick responses and quick actions, which climate change actors and development actors have to learn. Now, actually, I've slightly deviated from the question of finance, but why I mentioned all these things, because it is ultimately finance that will bring all these actors together. And all these funding mechanisms should have a flexible agenda where all these three actors are encouraged, are induced to come together. Yeah, over to Matthew. Yeah.
Good points, I agree. But just to add and also link it to these negotiations at COP29, because I think actually there are decisions taken here which will also influence how the possibility, what kind of possibilities there will be for addressing both humanitarian needs and more long-term development and climate concerns. Firstly, one of the experiences we have, which we have also documented through research, is the need for flexible funding. A lot of the funding is very tied to specific tasks or activities. And when we work with the loss and damage, when you work in a humanitarian situation which is linked to the climate change, you will also need to make sure that the activities are considering adaptation. But then you're stepping out of the humanitarian need, and you need to have the flexibility to use the funds both for the immediate need and the more long-term development. And that's an important element in all the funding discussions here. Another issue which is really important, which is also high on the agenda, is the access, to have local access. This is a big issue in the humanitarian debate about localization. It's equally important in the climate debate, where we talk about access to climate funding. And here, as an NGO, I'm really focusing a lot on the civil society access and the local access to make sure that there are instruments which are reaching that level. And thirdly, and this is maybe the most difficult one, which I don't know really if they can solve here, that's how to ensure that we get funding which is also more flexible for countries where there are conflicts to implement any kind of activity in a conflict area is difficult. It's costly, but we need to do it. Climate change is not on hold just because there is a war going on. So we need to adapt. We need to ensure that the risk for loss and damage is reduced in spite of the conflicts. And this is a challenge where we may not have the perfect answers yet, but it's something we need to look more into.
And I'm maybe going to push you on that one because I think there's some really interesting learning coming out of contexts like Somalia, where there is, a fragile context where the traditional sort of funding pathways, particularly for climate financing, may not yet, the governance may not be there to receive. And so, and maybe I'm nudging you, maybe I'm sort of slightly biased, but sort of is that suggesting that there should, maybe that's my agenda, there should be more civil society access to this type of funding, particularly in fragile conflict-affected settings?
Absolutely. Well, I guess I'm biased as well because we're coming from civil society. Civil society, especially the local civil society, they are always there. They cannot they're part of the communities. So the best way is, of course, to support them. But it's not always easy. As you say, there is also a lot of rules about compliance and safeguards which must be delivered. And this is where I see there needs to be also discussions with the donor community to make sure that there are flexibility for how the funding is channeled and also how it's reported back. Because we cannot leave these countries alone. They should not be left behind. And therefore we need to allocate funding. And yes, it may be more costly, but that's maybe something we need to accept because the alternative is that there are no support.
Thank you. More costly, but I am thinking about the share trust and recent reports demonstrating that actually there's an efficiency that can be made when local actors are resourced directly as opposed to going through sort of several layers of intermediaries. So I think there is actually quite a lot of evidence suggesting that there is an efficiency argument, but of course, first and foremost, an equity and a justice sort of focused argument that can be made.
I agree, but I'm thinking more about some practical cost. Just as an example, to transfer money from a country in Europe to Somalia, it's not just an ordinary transfer. Some countries you actually need to come with the money, deliver them in person, because you can't really get the money out to the communities because there are no functioning in banking systems, and that is costly. Also because you need to ensure security for the transport. So it's I absolutely agree that you can, if you bypass all the middlemans, you will actually get more money out, but you still need some kind of system to make the funding arriving.
I feel like we're starting to sort of think about the sort of thematic areas like financial inclusion, access. I'm very keen to come across to you and continue the conversation about financing, but Harry, did you want to just come in off the back of Matthias's remarks?
Thank you. I think you raised a very important point about access to civil society. I think what we must remember is that we keep going back and forth on this topic. There was a time there was excessive dependency on civil society, and then we actually rode back cutting that access. Now, what we need to understand is that we need to have a balanced approach. It's my opinion. And it's absolutely important that as in the spirit of localization, civil society actors should be strengthened and they should have more access. But it should not be that after a few years, again, we go back from that situation with whatever the experiences. I think what is more important is that we must push forward for localization and more access to civil society, but we should have a very good capacity development and accreditation kind of an approach where we will have an absolutely efficient process of creating civil society access to the finance of climate and humanitarian development finance. And they are also sufficient, they also have a sufficient capacity and with all the required processes of accountability and transparency and all that. So don't mistake me for of discouraging that. What I'm saying is that we should not go back and forth, and whatever the step we take, we should take with absolute surety, with preparation.
Rajiv, can I come across to you?
Yeah, I
Same
mean,
question.
see, the entire funding, I could see there's a lot of, already there is silos in the funding. You have loss and damage fund, you have mitigation fund, you have adaptation fund, you have GEF, you have a small grant fund. All are with the climate change. You have grant bargain, talking about 25% going to the local organizations, nothing happening, 1% is going on. What is required is that the coordination between all that. And with the instrument is that if there is even if it's a loan part, and that is country or society is facing the humanitarian crisis, that loan part, some part of that loan can be transformed into the grant, and immediate fund can be released, so that the extra burden of the public or the funding mechanism managers should not be there, because ultimately it's a public money, it's a taxpayer money. It's not that money somebody is coming from. So it's an entire cycle is interrelated. We are seeing into the silos. So now this COP is again talking about a new funding mechanism for next 20 years. And it's going to be trillions. But I'm not sure how it's going to meet the crisis, meet that funding gap. So that has to be taken care of. The second thing is that the two different kind of model for the funding application of funding is happening. One model is state-centric model. China has that state-centric model. India is adopting gradually, so cutting the voices sort of local organizations. So state is doing a lot of things. Civil society is not able to respond to that. On the contrary, in African countries and all that, where the governance level is not that stabilized or not good enough compared to, let's say, USA or UK, civil society organizations are doing a lot. So there is a conflict between the government and civil society organizations at their level and at the state level and the part of all countries. So you have to have some balance between two sort of model of development, how to use that funding, because the same set of funding will be looked after by the government and civil society organizations. At some state, it will happen both the way. Some state doesn't happen both the way. And in relation with the climate change, it also makes it very, very complicated, because if you're a winter country, if you are not a warmer country, you look for some heat. So your interest in the climate change is to getting more heat. You are a warmer country, you want more winter. So your interest of climate change is different than the climate change of that country, right? So there is a class of argument of how you meet the goal. And it is very layered. It's very layered. India is 30 Indian states and 9 UN territories. Every state has different level of development. And then dividing one NDC based on that 169 200 indicators is very, very difficult for every country. So a lot of diversity into that. And then you utilize those financing mechanism, private sector, corporate sector, loan, instrument, I don't know. A lot of things are going on. So unless people sit together and decide the synergy, the indicators, that gives some space to humanitarian financing, because humanitarian financing is also day by day being depleted. The more the crisis is happening and the kind of funding is coming, is there is a huge mismatch. And there are indicative reports. Passing the buck report is another one. You talk about SARE report. One report we are coming out as a humanitarian international. So that's again demonstration of, there's ample evidence of that, saying that there's a funding gap. But if you see the totality of the fund, available fund, and how much the fund has been utilized, there's another gap. Out of 200 billion available at developing countries, maybe they have spent 15 million and 20 billion only, because they lack of capacity to utilize those funds. So that also has to be enhanced. So all that things are very, very interrelated to me.
And I want to stay with this point. So we're talking a lot about the different financing streams, the importance of flexibility, the importance of understanding the breadth and depth of all of the different offerings, which can be incredibly difficult, even at the state level, let alone at the civil society level. I feel like a theme that's coming through in some of our discussions so far is around the role of local actors who sit across this continuum, who often wear multiple hats, multiple missions, multiple mandates, operating both in the development space, the humanitarian space, the climate space, sometimes the peace space as well. But the chronic, systemic barriers that prevent and prohibit them from accessing funding directly. You made the point around the grand bargain commitment that we've absolutely seen very, very little progress toward since it was made back in 2016. And potentially the same might end up being true of the climate financing if it cannot be resolved. So perhaps we could just stay with the point on local actors and the sort of the unique role that they are able to provide. And yeah, what are your reflections on those actors and their role and the importance of them and the need for them to access funding, all of this? Harry?
Yeah, I think the importance of local actors in accessing this funding is absolutely clear, and we, as I said before, it needs to happen in a systematic way. And in HelpAge International, we have a very iterative approach of building capacities of local actors, and we have, for instance, we have network of organizations in over 100 countries, and we have a program where we systematically build our actors local actors in each country in an iterative way over a period of time, and completely equip them with the right capacities, right resources, and right contacts, and then we completely localize them and make them independent, and we connect them with the right donors and right policymakers, and then they are ready to go, and they already have capacity to understand the local issues, community issues, and address them technically. And their connection with monitoring mechanism and also accessing financial resources has always been limited. And also their institutional and organizational structures and organizational capacities are always wanted from the international perspective. So we build all these capacities in a systematic way, and then in a transformative approach, and then we completely localize them, and then we let them access the finance. I think this is what I was talking about earlier also, that this is the approach that we should adapt, and so that civil society organizations are confidently with right capacities access climate finance, and also international financiers and donors are confident to approach them, and because they are also accountable to their own taxpayers, and then they want their money to be spent absolutely clearly. And it's not that local actors will not spend, but they need confidence. For building that confidence, we need to give right tools and right capacities. That's what we should do, and that's what we are doing.
Thank you. And actually, HelpAge, one of HelpAge partners, Manepo in Malawi, I think is a really great example of one of those organizations you worked in partnership with for a long period of time. And we're now seeing them sort of playing such an important role, both in terms of advocacy across the South African region, but also in terms of sort of working both as a development actor and as a humanitarian actor. So they're quite well known and familiar to Start Network. I think they're a good one to sort of illustrate the points that you've been making.
Great to know.
Can I pass the question along?
Absolutely. And I think localization agenda, and thanks for commenting on Grand Bargain. I mean, it's so important, especially when we talk about adaptation and loss and damage. The effects, the impacts of climate change are felt on local level, and obviously you also need local ownership and local led activities to address this. On mitigation, I can see some opportunities also for a more national approach. I mean, if you make energy for the whole country should get access to energy, but when you adapt, you need to look at the local context. But I do also see challenges which needs to be addressed. The whole approach, the Paris Agreement is built on the national development, the national plans, the NDCs. That means that the governments are making plans for how to address climate change in their countries. I like the setup, but there is a challenge, there is a risk, because especially in bigger countries like India, if you make a national plan, how do you ensure there is local ownership of the activities? And when you bring that to the finance debate, a lot of climate finance will be linked to the NDCs. That's, I think, quite clear. And then is the question, how do you ensure that the finance is sort of promoting the NDC, but at the same time implemented in a locally led way? That's not obvious. And I think it's really important to address, and I think it's also one of the roles we have as civil society actors to make sure that our governments all are understanding these challenges and committed to address them.
Yeah, I think, see, in my point of view, what local actors does, they are the one who give you the real picture of the situation. Come what may, you are belong to which country, local actors are the best actors who will give you the real picture, real knowledge situation. What they don't have is a diplomacy, the articulation of the knowledge that sells to the world, right? And that too, a lot of international organizations, the UN and World Bank have it, and that they play over it. So what they require is you respect to their knowledge, right? And instead of calling them a partner, call them a friend. Because when the moment you call them a friend, you can take their criticism. Because friend can criticize you, partner may not. Okay, we say them partners. There's no need to say partner, call them a friend. So the entire approach is changing. Something like that, you're calling yourself expert. That means you know everything. But you say you're a student, you're ready to learn. Right, the entire mental attitude has changed. So if you have it, and not everything boils you the money, because we are ending talking about how much percentage have gone to local actors, how they access it. That's a good thing to have it, because that gives them meat to their voices. But beyond that, also need dignity, respect of a human being. And if you have that, then you are going to spread the agenda of localization. Localization is not just about replacing small to big and big to small. It has to be working together. And the more voices this point will have it, and probably the nexus approach we're talking about will be more successful. Complexity will be more simpler, will not go away, but definitely more simpler, and more results will come out. Yeah, thank you.
There is something about expertise in this discussion. It's interesting because I think all of us have acknowledged that local actors have expertise that those of us that are international actors can only dream of. Right? They have an understanding of the local context, the local culture, the power at play, the risks at the local level that our due diligence practices sort of pay very little mind to. They have their expertise. But likewise, across sort of climate development, humanitarian spaces, we each have, there's sort of technical expertise that you find there. And almost the requirement for this to be an ecosystem, the requirement for all of us to work better in collaboration, and maybe for the power to be recalibrated so that we can each play our part well and be resourced and supported to do so. Question, where have you seen good examples of where sort of local actors have been empowered and have done tremendous work or been able to work in this crisis continuum? Have you got any examples you could share?
I think one example is Humanitarian Aid International. We are quite a local actor, based out in India, established in India 2017, and 7 years only in India. It's quite a new organization, very small team, but the kind of impact we made in 7 years, nationally and internationally, is a reflection of the capacity of the local actors. And we are not only empowering ourselves, but we're empowering the other local actors also. We're running a network called the Local itself, which is also a member of the Grand Bargains network. And in that network, we are supporting around 40 local organizations in different parts of the country. NEED is another one, is the part of local network. And we're empowering them in terms of writing proposals, access to the fundings, training and capacity building, technical knowledges, everything. And every month we do a sort of 2-hour session with each of them. We also secure certain funding from them in terms of providing them finance, from the HR solutions, from the management part of all of it. So in a way, we are trying to do so, being a local actor, promoting localization, and at the same time, creating a right kind of balance between the policy making at the national or international level, and at the same time bringing the voices from the ground so that a lot of convergence will happen, and it is happening. And it is happening, so a lot of doors have opened for local actors, and a lot of international agencies, World Bank agencies are reaching out to them directly, and they're getting benefits. It is a lot to come out, numbers has to go up, so it is there. I think I could say that somebody like organization like HI who is doing some work and is getting recognition, it's a sign of the impact of localization. But the big sign is that the people who thought about localization, those who started the initiative, sitting where in UN or international organizations, they thought of about local actors. So the first kudos goes to them. Then after, kudos goes to the people who are working to the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to bring us back to this COP and the discussions or the negotiations that are ongoing around this NCQG. And perhaps somebody on the panel might like to break that down for those in the audience who are less familiar with the NCQG, but also to talk specifically about the Fund for Loss and Damage under the UNFCCC. So this COP, the hope is that the negotiations will arrive at sort of an understanding of how it's going to be operationalized, how it's going to be financed. I guess any thoughts on the progress that's being made, recommendations that you would be taking? Matthias?
Yeah, this is what I follow mostly on this COP. And to begin with, NCQG is the new quantified, collective and quantified goal for climate finance. And it's funny that you refer to it in relation to the loss and damage fund, because exactly this is one of the key conflicts. If loss and damage should be counted or not in this new finance goal. And it's one of the things where we are, to a large extent also we were quite surprised, because we created this fund last year to address loss and damage, and now it's not supposed to be included in the finance goal. It's contradictory, but it is one of the quite difficult negotiations right now. When it comes to the fund, I expect that it will be able to deliver money next year. There is the board has now they're sort of based. They have a base for where they live, and we have a director, and I think they will be able to start next year if there's no hinders on the way. And one of the hinders, of course, is if there are any money. We have seen a couple of pledges yesterday. I think both Australia and New Zealand, and a little bit earlier this week we had Sweden. So there are some money coming in, but if we're really going to address loss and damage, we will need much more funding. So that will be the big task.
And do you think that they will agree to have the loss and damage fund and the targets, the funding targets, be a sub-goal of the NCQG, which would shift it from discretionary financing to an obligatory or something a little bit stricter, maybe to Harry's point earlier about the need for sort of flexible funds, but sort of predictable funds? And
to be honest, I don't know, because this is really the one of the core conflicts. Developed countries do not want to include loss and damage in this goal, and while developing countries say that this must be included. So let's see how they negotiate. There will be a lot of trade now in the coming days or hours, where they have their different agendas, and we'll see how it plays out. But I'm still a little bit worried, because if there is no commitments on loss and damage finance, I'm afraid that we will see a situation in the coming decades where we take money from adaptation and use it for loss and damage. This is what we have seen so far, and that means that we will undermine the efforts to adapt.
Yeah, I think as Mati said, this is an intense negotiation going on, and different countries have different views, and G77 has one view, and African countries, and I think we don't know whether we will be able to come to some kind of an agreement in this COP29 or not. But we're actually, as he said, is hugely worried. I think bigger worry is n- not how much money is going to come. The bigger worry is how that money is going to be distributed and spent. And I think this is where I think we probably civil society should have, especially the sub goals, we should have a very kind of a powerful voice there in terms of what are the conditions that are going to be attached with this fund and how different marginal groups will be able to access benefits from this funding and how this funding will be spent or will it be monopolized by some big actors. All these things have to be clear. But from our view, from all this civil society point of view, and what we believe is that I think there should be very clear, democratized and decentralized way of allocating these resources so that all marginalized groups, women, children, older people, and indigenous communities, and all these marginalized groups will be able to access these finances equitably. Yeah, thank you.
I think one point I would like to mention is here is that the funding mechanism will take this time to come out because the bigger the country, the USA, is not a part of it now. Till time the transition will happen, new government will come, and the kind of voices you are saying that most likely they may not be the part of the climate change negotiation because earlier they withdraw, then Biden came, they been part of it again, they're not a part of it. So the funding issue will be remain there. So the amount of funding is required and funding will pour in will be definitely going to be vast difference because the major funder contributor is not a part of it. So funding mechanism will be always in limbo. But what Hari said is that what is available and how you're going to utilize is more important. So whether you're going to utilize and connect it with the NDCs or the national climate action plan or national humanitarian response plan. So how those fundings are being utilized and linked with that is not happening because most of the countries have developed their country climate action plan, but they didn't have the linkage with the funding because they think is a part of the regular development work. So planning is a one thing, implementation of the plan is another thing because for the implementation you need to fund and you don't have a fund, separate fund. So how they're going to link with that is more important to achieve those climate or humanitarian or mitigation goals we're talking of. Yeah.
Thank you. I mentioned earlier about some interview that some research that Start Network had done last year on climate change. And as part of that interview, alongside Professor Salim Ul-Huq, we also interviewed people such as Harjeet Singh and Paul Knox-Clark. And they felt very confident at this time. This was coming, sort of going into COP28. They felt very confident that sort of the funding will come, or funding will come. And maybe that's, well, the jury's out as to whether we'll get the funding that we're hopeful for. But I think one of the messages that they left us with was we have to, as actors, as humanitarian actors, as development actors, as climate actors, if we are to deploy that financing, if we're to play a role alongside governments in deploying that funding and sort of getting the money where it's needed to the most vulnerable communities that are affected by climate change, then we have to work better together. Like, we cannot be competing over sort of funding the way that we do with humanitarian financing. We have to do far better at collaborating, at coordinating, and sort of really working as part of this sort of wider ecosystem. I wonder if you have recommendations that you could make to people operating in these different spaces as to sort of how they can prepare themselves to work together more effectively, more collaboratively.
I think I would comment on the civil society because that's where my voice can be heard. That we should have a unified approach, and so we should continue to have a unified approach, not just in one COP and another COP, and it should be a continuous process. And wherever possible, that we should join forces in terms of developing joint programs and accessing resources, and also we should go as much as possible in a unified face to the communities because I always often see in the communities that they have sometimes they ask me bluntly, why don't you people work together? So, and this is the question also many governments ask. So, my recommendation is mainly to the civil society organizations that as these funding mechanisms are developing, let us also work together to develop joint programs and joint plans in different countries and different contexts so that we have a collaborative approach on accessing these resources and also implementing programs that will take these resources more efficiently to the communities from anticipation to resilience to response.
I'm just adding a little bit because I agree, and I think there will not be enough money. Maybe I'm a little bit pessimistic, but we will always need more money. So we need to find ways to use the money efficiently, and I think collaboration is a key. In Dan Church Aid, we look a lot at the possibilities for multi-stakeholder partnerships, where we try to see how different actors can contribute in different ways. And maybe not so much in relation to loss and damage, but when we move into adaptation and mitigation, the private sector can play important roles. Investors can play a role. Local authorities can play a very important role. And I also think that as civil society, we can also improve a lot by, for example, when we develop our initiatives, that we also look on, try to see what else, what are other actors doing, how is our efforts linking to the national plans and the plans of the local authorities, to make sure that we are firstly not contradicting, but secondly to see if we can find synergy, and in that way hopefully get more out of the small money we have.
Yeah, similar sort of SDG 17, Partnership for the Goal, with a enhanced recognition of the humanitarian actors, which is missing right now, because climate crisis has begun already, and it is the humanitarian organizations who are going to respond to those climate crises. So the advocacy should be working together with more recognition of the humanitarian organizations along with the local actors. That is another missing chain, because this is a parallel going on. Sendai is parallel, SDG is parallel, others are, climate change is parallel. So that has to be partnership for the goal with a more emphasis on humanitarian actors with importance to the local actors. That should be the way of, in my point of view, way forward. Thank you. But I agree all that. Thank you.
And maybe one last, I think we have some time, messages to the funders, messages to those donors that we're working with, whatever the type of funding we're describing, messages that you might want to relay to them in terms of how they could be prioritizing, how they could be organizing themselves.
It's a I can't say the message, but what I see in the local language is that the world is your own home. Think of it as own home. So if you're thinking that you will be facing challenges I'm not, you are wrong. One day you'll also face the same challenge what I'm facing it. So think of in that logic and start working together. Rich or poor, left or right, capitalist or not capitalist, but think of it as a global challenge and sit together, devise strategy, work together, come out. Thank you.
Well, if I have one message to the decision makers or to those who have the money, I think it will be remember the civil society. Remember that civil society is an important actor and an important part of development around the world. There is a tendency when I sit in the big plenary and listen to parties, there's a tendency to only talk about the private sector and the investors as the solution and the partners. But governments should make sure that the civil society is equal partner, and yeah, I hope that's going to be heard.
I think these are two very important points. I just want to complement that, say that if I can send a message to those who have money, my message is that look beyond your logistics convenience, your diplomatic convenience, and also your monitoring convenience, and invest a little bit more time and thinking in terms of understanding how do you make the last mile impact of the money that you are holding, and then the solutions will come. And so that much of I think rigor that the people who are having money should have. So that means that you open up for more partnership, you open up for more possibilities, you open up for more players to come into the scene, and also encourage the actors that whom you are actually giving resources, to encourage them to have a joined up programs. And we have that humanitarian development nexus that is for the last 7 to 8 years we have been trying to encourage different actors, and we are not I think probably we are not halfway through also, and that is largely because the donors have not sufficiently actually racing up with that the transformation that is happening among us. Many organizations are ready to have a joined up program with humanitarian development nexus, but the donors continue to have compartmentalized funding, and that again splits us. So I think donors also should catch up with the spirit of HTP Nexus. Donors also should have a lot more, I mean, they should have bigger elephant ears. They should listen more. They should get more knowledge from the ground. And they should understand that there are more vulnerable communities, and not just women and children. There are more communities who are indigenous, who are disabled, who are older people. I think the money that the donors give, they are responsible to make sure that everyone who actually is in need and who is marginalized are able to access it, for which the donors should have a lot more comprehension, a lot more listening capacity. This is what my message is. Thank you.
Rajiv, Matthias, Harry, thank you so much. I think if I'm looking to the audience to see if we have any questions, or are we... Right, if there are any questions in the audience.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you. It's a very insightful presentation. Thanks for the insights. When you speak about private partnerships, like partnership from the private companies or financial institutions, there is no clear taxonomy in social. For example, we have taxonomies in environmental area, where to fund or not. But especially with respect to the social side of investment, there's no clear taxonomy. For example, as you say, investors don't have a clarity on where to put money and what are the KPIs and what they expect out of these investments later. So wouldn't we recommend us do something on this social taxonomy so that who all invest have a clear clarity on where the money goes and what are the impacts? Thank you.
Harry?
Your name and where are you from?
Ganesh Kumar from India.
Wonderful point. Actually, your question itself has an answer. We should have that taxonomy, and we should develop it. And I think in the civil society, we have very limited capacities, and I think organizations like yours should build those capacities. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think, to be honest, I think we just need to look more into how to collaborate and how to make these partnerships. In some areas, it may be fairly easy because there are already existing ways of working, but the needs are so big, and we need to see how things can work. And our experience, we do have some collaboration with the private sector, and our experience is that we need to spend quite a lot of time in ensuring that we have a joint approach, that our aims are aligned, and it's because we are not used to collaborate, and the better we can, the more time we can spend on collaborating, the better we will be.
One more thing is, there are two different approaches you were talking of. Most of the not-for-profit sector or INGOs, NGOs, have a different development perspective compared to the corporates or the private sector. So when the two different development perspective matches or converge, there's bound to have a divergent point of view. And especially when you invest in social sector, you are never ever going to have the clear-cut accountability and taxations and the result framework the way you have in different industries. So unless that mindset was not developed into the corporates and the private sector, it is not going to happen that they will have the clear-cut goal. They have to view their outcome in different ways, going away from the KPIs. Most of it is a very structured way of looking things. What are the outputs we have, what are the numbers we have, what are the KPI we have, what are the ratios we have. That's good in different infrastructure in the business and engineering projects, but may not good work out in the development projects, especially where the processes are more important than the outcomes. When talking to the woman or the children and the elderly, you cannot talk them with KPIs. No, these are very different fluid things. So those who are converging on those issues, they have to take these considerations into the mind. If they have that approach, they will have better results.
Great. Thank you all so much. And I think maybe just lastly, because I can't help myself, but I think also when we think about bringing new funders in and sort of non-traditional donors, I think we have to be really wary not to fall into the trap of just thinking about accountability up to the donor and completely sort of forgetting about those that we need to be the most accountable to, which are the communities that we're intending to serve. So the importance of bringing them in from the point of knowing what interventions are appropriate, are suitable, will meet their needs and their desires, but then also how they are being involved in deciding whether or not we've done a good job and whether or not we could have improved upon it. So perhaps I'll just add that last point. I think we have maybe one more question, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up from the gentleman at the front.
Thank you very much. I would like just to ask if it's possible. You were talking about the continuum and the complementarity of the work of each actors, but does it mean that there is a kind of silo, a continuity of silo work, or it is a contiguum? Contiguum is something where people is working all together, but they have, as the Mr. said, they have to coordinate. They have at the same time find a way to see and to sit and to coordinate what they are doing. Not only just move forward, but saying that at one time they have to see to each other and to coordinate. Because continuum is something like one is ending here and then the other actor is continuing, and then it is ending here and then the other actor is... It's just a kind of reflection, but...
May I? Yeah, maybe I can answer with an example. It's not so humanitarian focused, but more development. But we have a project in Kenya where there are smallholder farmers who are facing the challenge with heat waves, and their crops get lost before they can sell them on a market. So their income is decreasing. But if you have good cooling technologies, you can save the crops and you can actually get the return and a better income. The challenge is that cooling is not so easy to get. It's costly. But if they collaborate, and if we also include a microfinance institute in the collaboration, and we also include the company who's selling the cooling into the collaboration, suddenly we have a mix of stakeholders who all have an interest, different interest. The company would like to sell cooling. The microfinance institute, they want to get some interest. The farmers want to get the cooling, but they also have an interest that it works and that it's sustainable. and suddenly it actually can deliver a result with smaller money than if we would just do it as separate projects. And I think that kind of collaboration, that's at least one way we can try to and learn more from, to see how we can find new solutions.
One more example, I think it's a great example, Matt. Similarly, we have a program in Ukraine, and we actually started with a conflict humanitarian response, and then we realized that whether irrespective of conflict or not, there are a lot of other issues of social protection and say care for older people, and then we joined with development actors to ensure that that social protection and care is also taken care. And now we also have seen that conflict plus development issues plus now exacerbated by this climate change issues. So we're also collaborating with climate change actors to provide anticipatory action and also early warning and adaptation kind of solutions. So this is you probably enter into this continuum with one solution, but you will find that multiple solutions are needed, and then therefore you have to collaborate with multiple actors and have a unified approach.
Thank you so much to all of the panel, and thank you to the audience members that joined us. I think we can leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks also to online audience. I hope there are millions.